Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Just want to welcome you from all over. I see we have folks from Ohio and California, Toronto, New York. Just want to thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited about today's focus about living on mission in an urban neighborhood. And so my name is Lori Ruffin, and I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I am an operations consultant and operations manager specifically for the V3 movement. And so I'm really glad that you're here. We want to thank the Praxis Gathering and the V3 for hosting this seminar. And I would like to introduce Doug Logan. He is a missional planter from New Jersey. And so we're really glad to have him here today. And then we've got J.R. Woodward, the leader of the V3 movement. He has been the national director for the V3 planting movement and author of Creating a Missional Culture, as well as the Church as Movement. And so we're glad to have him here today. And also would love to just mention that we have the Practice Gathering where both Doug Logan will be a speaker, as well as J.R. Woodward will be a speaker at the Practice Gathering, which is a conference that we do each year for practitioners, for church planters from all across the nation to really dig into best practices of planting. And this year we'll be meeting in Philadelphia at the Asian Arts Initiative, and the theme is to love your neighborhood. So we're really excited about this theme. We think it's really relevant for where we are right now in the nation. And so with that, without further ado, I'm gonna just start with you, Doug. I'd love to direct the question. You have lots of experience in planting in the urban context, and you've written the book On the Block, Developing a Biblical Picture of Missional Engagement. So with that, how do you move people in an urban context from a traditional view of church to a missional view? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, Lori, I believe that, first and foremost, I don't want to dismiss all traditional. It's not all bad. Yet, there's some traditional stuff that is whack, and it's not in the Bible, and it blocks and hinders people from a clear vantage point of seeing Jesus high and lifted up. Mm-hmm. And so there's some traditional churches that are missional, but so I want to take the best. For me, as an African American growing up in the church in the hood, you know, I want to keep the music, I want to keep the clapping, I want to keep the rock out, but at the same time, I don't want to keep sometimes in church we push people out because of dress, because of hats, because of slang. And so one thing I've sought to do was I realized a lot of people just were not discipled. And so discipleship, I use this language in our leadership is we must make missional disciples who are pregnant to make other disciples who are missional, not just disciples who want to wax eloquent and accrue information to argue with people. And so discipleship, now there's a renewing of how we think about Jesus, how we think about mission, and how we see ourselves in participation with Jesus on mission. And then we have to develop teams that are missional disciples that will begin to birth out more missional disciples. And then from that, those are the leaders that we pray rise to the top, pull up, that become from indigenous unbeliever to indigenous leader, because they've been discipled as missional disciples. They've been developed in leadership as through missional discipleship, and all that means is through the scriptures to have a focus and a reality to reach the least, the last, and the lost, and also walk in holiness, and then develop those guys out. And I think that will rewrite and change the narrative of arguing with my traditional friends about why you wear a hoodie and why y'all always on the street. Well, they weren't discipled in that. So I want to disciple this next crew in that. And so this next generation of church planners. So when my grandkids go to church, I'm praying my grandson is going to be something in the church, preach or something. He'll look at, it'll be commonplace for him to go hard for Jesus on the block to see people meet Jesus.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, JR, how would you suggest that we move people in an urban context from a traditional view of church to a more of a missional view?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right alongside it. I think the key is discipleship, and I maybe want to hone in on a couple elements to that. I think discipleship, has instruction to it, but as Doug implied, it's also imitation and immersion into the context that you're at.
Yes.
It's taking things not just in the sanctuary, that's part of it, but out to the streets. And so I think if we don't kind of lead people there, and incarnation is kind of leaving our place of comfort and what we know to the people that we're sent to and going into their context. We're comfortable not being on the home field and just inviting people to things that we're doing, but we're actually going to the places where they live and they breathe, and we're learning and we're taking people, and that's partly, that's the type of discipleship that we need to be engaged in. And I think, along with that, maybe, the dogmatic depth that has developed in the whole missional thinking. So when you think missional, I think I personally think things like Missio Dei, like that, or I would say in the beginning was community, and at the center of the universe is a missionary God. And we see this within the triune God, the Father sending the Son sending the Father and Son sending the Spirit, and the triune God sending us. But the point being that mission is initiated with God himself, and we join him on mission. It's not a function of the church. It's the church is invited into joining God in the renewal of all things. So we're a sent people, bringing the good news that's not just, that is personal, but not private. It should affect the social realities and cosmic realities, and not just our personal lives. Our personal is where it starts, but it ought to ripple out to all of creation. Just like at the beginning, sin rippled out and messed up all of creation, there should be a whole reversal of that. And so, and then I think the part of missional and movemental element is really kind of understanding the core of what the church is. And for me, if I had to put it in 3 words, it'd be communion, community, and commission. And the commission is a very wide sense of mission, and obviously includes discipleship. And I think we need to have minimalist methods. In other words, whatever the core thing that we're multiplying ought to be something that just about anybody could do. So we have to have something. Discipleship has to be reproducible and has a simplicity to it in its structure. And then just having some transferable tools that are simple, sticky, and scalable. And so that's that. I would just kind of add in a little bit to that discipleship element and how that might work its way out concretely.
Thank you. Thank you for adding those thoughts. So one other question to consider is how do we approach relationships and discipleship when people are transient? We know that a lot of times people are moving in and out of our urban areas. So what does relationship and discipleship look like in that case? And JR, you could take a first stab at that, and then we'll.
All right. No, I mean, obviously we live in probably one of the most transient times. It's easy to move. There's a lot of reasons why people move. And I think we have to, I think, my last plant was in LA, in Hollywood in particular. Hollywood is a very transient area. People are coming and going. They got their dreams, they want to be actors or something, dealing with the industry, might be music or whatever. And I think what we did there is, we just formed these mid-sized groups and communities and discipleship groups within that. And part of what we really try to help people live into and appreciate is being rooted in a neighborhood, and really learning what it means to be a rooted people and connected to a place. And I think no matter how long anybody stayed, I think people they picked that up. They picked up before you can go well, you need to learn to stay well. And I think that in our society where maybe we just leave and move around for unimportant reasons, we need to kind of really deeply reflect with our community on why we're moving out. Is it kind of because God's calling us out, but I just think that we need to have a little bit more reflection and be a part of a community. And I think people start to pick that up in community that is rooted in their neighborhood, that cares about the neighborhood. If we want to see long-term transformation, it's not going to be coming in for a couple of years and rolling out. You gotta have something that's willing to stay there for generation after generation.
Thanks. And Doug, how would you answer that?
Well, how do you approach relationships when they're so transient? I always say prayerfully and carefully, and often painfully. I'm in Camden, New Jersey, and you get here and you sharing the gospel with people, and JR, what he talks about is absolutely right. So I amen that. But here's the elements of the painful part for me is a lot of transient nature of people in center city context is, man, they get babies and they have to move somewhere else. Leases are up. They get rented out, all of that stuff, and jobs, because those people, particularly in hipster context and just in urban professional context. But for me, most of my transient things are of that affect people are jail, death, and eviction. And then sometimes the come up. Sometimes, something happens. You're just your hard work you live in the hood. You just go to work hard and you save your money, and you're working hard for your family to put them in a better situation, whether in the community or out of the community. I wish it was more in the community, but often it's out. And so, but JR has said, well, like, we have to grind in those contexts, love big in those contexts. What's missing for us in Camden is, we're like we have more single parent homes than any city in America. Therefore, I don't get off the hook on being a preacher. I'm Uncle Doug, Pastor Doug, Plumber Doug, go to jail and check you out, Doug. Come to your bail hearing, Doug. So I become a uncle and a father to so many. And so often they're jumping out in my urban context because they think there's a family atmosphere in a different place. And so we as the church are the family of God, and we have to show them what it looks like to be in a community. And our community model is the Trinity. So we love them, we hug them, we cry with them. Sometimes it's just showing up and bleeding with them. And then people are still going to go. That's just what it is. I often say this, me and JR are just bus drivers on God's mission. Like, people get on the bus and get off the bus. My wife drives the bus driver never cries when she gets off. So we're just divine bus drivers. We run the course God gave us, and everybody who gets on, we treat them great. And everybody who gets off, we love them till they step off the boat.
Wow. That's awesome. It kind of speaks to commitment, whether it's for short term or long term. It's being all in. Well, so Doug, I'd love for you to consider, how do you identify what God is already up to, especially when there are places of language and cultural barriers? Even the way that you answered that question, the previous question, you talked about the professional who may be transient for one reason versus potentially indigenous residents who may be transient for other reasons. When you are planting, when you're planting and you're looking to discern what is God already up to, what does that look like when there are cultural barriers and even potentially language barriers in an urban context?
Well, I think a good businessman, he would do a group test. He would pull people in and hear their stories. Some businesses would do a survey. A good bioscientist would test the water and see what's going on in it. So me and my wife, before we came to Camden in 2011, we don't do date night because I'm old and slow. So we do date morning because I go to bed like 8:30 p.m. And so we would just go in and order a doggy bag. We would do date night with a takeout. So that wasn't working. And so we just started doing date morning. So we would come to Camden on Saturdays for almost 2 years. We would ride around and pray. And if we saw somebody walking, I would say, hey, I'd love to talk to you. I want to plant a church here. And I'm not necessarily from Camden. Can you tell me about your story and its story? Nobody ever told me no, because I offered them free breakfast. And so they all said yes, and nobody rejected me. I shared the gospel with no issue. My wife didn't even complain. Praise God for her. And so that was my test. That was my, scooping some water out of the pond and putting the stuff in it. And then I begin to hear and hear and hear. And then when I begin to hear the problems, I also begin to hear the places where they found joy in. And man, I just went after those places and people who universally people seem to talk good about. And that's where I jumped in. I also began to ask the city officials. So the second thing I did was I went to the city officials and asked them, how could we serve them? We redid a basketball court. We just started participating. And the next thing you know, people who were up to some crazy God stuff, man, they were like, yo, we want to get with you. And then it just started coming out of the woodwork. You play some 90s hip hop. Somebody who loved 90s hip hop in a crowd. You play it in a crowd, you're going to know who's old because their head's going to start bopping. Mm-hmm. So if you start doing some gospel ministry, and people's head are going to bop to that, and then they're going to come out. And once they started coming out, I said, man, what y'all doing? They said, oh, we doing this. Oh, I'm in with y'all. What can we do? And the next, it was just popping all around. It was going crazy. We just jumped on. We could jump on. We filtered out the angry people who wanted to argue tattoos and earrings, didn't want to be bothered with them. Gave them a Subway hoagie and kept them moving. And we just grabbed to the people who really were trying to kill it for Jesus, who wanted Jesus' name more famous. And we connected with them. And by God's grace, one of them was our mayor in Camden, a couple other churches on outside, Department of Public Works in my city. Man, them cats just jumped on and was ready to rock and roll. Yes.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, what would you say? How do you identify what God's already up to when there are cultural and language barriers?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Doug said was right on. We kind of, one of the names that is common out there, like Thomas Wolfe kind of brought to popularity, is finding that person, those people of peace. And I think, in a sense, Doug, as you kind of scoped wide and connected with a lot of people, you ultimately found those people of peace that had a receptive nature to them as it relates to the good news. They had a good they actually have a reputation, either good or bad, but they're kind of known figures, known characters in the neighborhood. And that they kind of can refer you to a lot of other people. So they're obviously, those are some characteristics of the person of peace. So that receptivity is important. Each element is pretty important to build upon. And I think for me, in LA, it's like, meeting some Chinese Indonesian people that are different language, that are at one point, seeking asylum, maybe they're stayed over their visa a little bit long, and how do you help them out kind of legally? For me, it was joining the neighborhood council, which is kind of becoming an elected office just in the neighborhood and being aware of what was happening in the neighborhood from the people in the neighborhood. And again, it's that principle that God's already at work, and where are we joining him as far as the people of peace, and as far as some of the projects that he already has got going on that I don't have to initiate everything. There's a lot of things going on that I can help out with. And I think that's just a beautiful space to get in, because I think we have to be careful, to think that, especially if you're a church plant, if you're going in just with your own agenda, as opposed to trying to understand what God's already doing and joining him, it's a two different postures. One posture lends itself, I think, to a fruitfulness and a little bit easierness, and building relationships as instead of kind of being a competition or something like that. But I think that's why it's so important to kind of discern what God's doing and join him in that.
Yeah, and let me close, and I'm not adding anything to JR. I didn't answer the question exactly clean. And for us with language barriers, by God's grace, my son married my beautiful daughter-in-law who's Latino, and she's Puerto Rican, and man, she's been a my Rosetta Stone. So, you know, she's been she's been doing it. And then, you know, a host of beautiful Spanish folk are members of our church, and they've really helped to connect that gap for us in Camden, which is primarily African American, about 48%, and Latino about 50%. So for us, those language barriers were in many ways torn down just through a few relationships.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I guess whether by marriage or by membership, some kind of way, intentional,
That's great.
intentional crossing barriers, and that's awesome. So one question that I have, you know, when you have a diverse group of people, it can tend towards disunity. So, you know, JR, would you kind of take the lead and answer this question? How do we build unity amongst diverse groups of people, maybe coming from different cultural backgrounds or even Christian contexts?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the, you know, when I started kind of a mid-sized group in Hollywood, and we had quite a bit of diversity of people, we just took time to have a dinner and hear people's stories. And I think when we hear people's stories, there's always something that we can identify with and appreciate. And as we hear each other's stories, I feel like, you know, we kind of, it's one of the pieces to go into it. I think also, like, we have to approach kind of relationships, not, our first posture shouldn't be suspicion, but it ought to be just an openness and a willingness to appreciate the other person for who they are. I think that, you know, a willingness to be honest with each other and not hide things from each other, just be truth tellers to each other, and be peacemaking. Like our, again, posture should always be to how do we create dialogue as opposed to, you know, letting the world and the world systems that have created divisions among people to dismantle those, you know. And I think part of that dismantling is what the work of Christ. And if you kind of look in Ephesians in particular, he was taking two very diverse groups of the Jews and the Gentiles and saying, you know, there's one new humanity being made in Christ. And I think this is, you know, the case today. We can take, you know, we might have different divisions between maybe different backgrounds or different ethnicities, but the fact is that we're one new humanity in Christ. And so I think we need to help people live into our identity of who we are now as this new humanity, and really, like, at the cross, there's an even playing field. You know, it's like we're all at the same place at the cross. We all need the cross to kind of bring us together. So there's a lot of things, but I'll let Doug share some thoughts here.
Well, yeah, Lori. You know, again, my diverse group of people come with race and socioeconomics and all of that in the city. I have, you know, people coming in. I have a woman who plays sometimes on a worship team. She went to Juilliard. She's from the suburbs outside of New Jersey. And then in the same time, I got, you know, former felons and, you know, and all of that. It's a crazy, crazy mixture. And so what we've sought to do, again, it comes back to what discipleship looks like. The foundation of the discipleship often creates the posture of the person when it comes to the gospel. So now, if the approach is legalistic, weird, culture-centered, or idea-centered and not Christ-centered, then that's where it's going to be weird. And in my context, you know, the wrong person says the wrong thing to the wrong person. It's a problem. It's a I got to break it up problem. And so we do our best to manage that. However, the other thing is, the gospel we preach, particularly when I think about the Great Commission, we have made the Great Commission water with lemon, and not the potency of the cure of man's sickness. God has said it's him, it's Jesus, who is the Christ. Take his name, his word to the world. We are the only hope for humanity, but we turn that into an anecdotal, well, you know, we're going to be friends. Nah, the gospel, when he says, go make disciples of all nations, That would have been, in our context, Bloods and Crips. Bloods taking the gospel to Crips. Not just Bloods who take the gospel to Crips, but Bloods who take the gospel to Crips who killed their mom and them.
Wow.
That would be Jews that became Christian taking the gospel to Nazis. It's a bold commission. It's not a let's sing CCM with an extra bass and call it diversity. There ain't no diversity. Walmart's more diverse than most churches, and they don't fight at Walmart. Everybody go shopping with no problem.
Oh my!
And so when we're dealing with diverse groups of people, we have to allow the scriptures to begin to guide us. And are we shaping people in the church through discipleship? Are we molding, pouring in, investing our lives into them to realize the boldness of our commission? And I'll go further. And are we diversity centered or gospel centered? Are we diversity centered or gospel centered? Because the gospel in simple, the gospel creates diversity, but we want to get diversity and get to the gospel. How about we get to the gospel and then let that filter us in to diversity, because it breaks down our non-diverse hearts. And secondly, and then when the Great Commission is no longer anecdotal, it's not water with lemon, but it is the cure, then it becomes practical. But now we can handle the cost, right? Because what happens is building community with diverse people groups costs you something. And nobody wants to give up anything when we're arguing about Republicans and Democrats, when we're arguing about bad posts about Charlottesville. Because now we go back to our corners in those worlds, the Great Commission gets thrown out. And then when we get together on Sunday, we don't want to, we have to get together, cry together, bleed together, and sometimes argue a little bit, so we'll mess around and be friends. But it's going to cost us something.
Wow, you said a whole lot. I'm putting that Walmart comment in my pocket. I'm taking that with me. So, gospel, the transformation of the gospel and how that makes an impact. Well, so how do you? And I'm asking you, Doug, starting with you. How do you stoke the interest of disinterested people? Or just say, hey, like I don't know. I'm not really bought into this.
Well,
this idea of living on mission in an urban neighborhood.
Colossians 4. Pray. The dirty little secret of church planners is we don't pray. We like strategy over sovereignty. We want strategy over sovereignty. When I think we need to learn how to pray. So Paul tells, pray for us that a door for the word will be opened. We kick the door down with our webpage and our cool slogans. We've got branding. Like, we don't need prayer. We got branding. We've got small groups. You know, man, we got web pages, Twitter accounts. We don't need no prayer. And so we need to pray for an opportunity to get the word in first. And we can't be held hostage to the numbers of our agencies that are pressing us to have enough people to justify the salary, because we have to cook like a crock pot, not like a frying pan. Often church planning is get her done, get her quick. But God don't always cook like that. You can't make no brisket fast. You got to smoke that thing slow, baby. And I got some brisket Christians. I've been cooking them a long time. I'm trying to get that gospel in on me. So when you cut them open, you can smell that gospel all the way to the core. But, so when it comes to disinterested people, we lean in praying that God would open the door for the word. We don't kick doors in. We are fishers of men, not hunters of men. And then we're slow cooking. I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna say this quick. There was a young man, young man on my block. He was in Philly, got shot up real bad. Was a Christian. That sounds weird, but he decided he wasn't a Christian after he got shot because he felt God shouldn't have let him get shot. He lost his mom within 7 months after that. So he was done with God and all of that. Next thing you know, he gets away from, he was going to Epiphany, Philadelphia with Dr. Eric Mason, my pastor. And the next thing you know, he lives in Camden. I move here, I'm sitting on the thing. He walks by and I say, what's up, bro? And this is what he says. I'm trying to get away from y'all. Get off my block. What are you doing here? Are you helping somebody move? No, I'm moving here. And so for 3 to 4 years, he had to walk past my house. And you know what I said to him every day? Praise the Lord, brother. Man, I'm praying you receive the Lord today. Leave me alone. I'm praying for you, brother. Come on, get some coffee. He got coffee. We ate together. We hung together. One time he was walking by and I was having a rough day and I didn't say nothing to him. And he said, yo, you ain't gonna talk that Jesus talk to me today? 4 years later. I said, yeah, man, what's up? Man, you wanna pray with me? Yeah, Diddy, I need to receive the Lord, man. And I prayed with him to receive the Lord. 4 years in that crock pot. Brisket, baby. Hard to cook that brisket. Your eyes be burning from the smoke.
That's awesome.
They are. What would you say? How are we? What's your approach to disinterested folks?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I kind of think back to a story too. Like one of the guys I kind of met at a coffee shop who, you know, described himself as atheist. You know, not interested in God. You know, we started to meet for lunches, and you know what I realize is with every person I meet, like because we're human beings, we have kind of fundamental needs. Like it doesn't matter who you are, what you are. Like you there's a sense of, everybody has a sense of beauty. Everybody has a sense of justice, especially if somebody does something against them, then they can with real clarity know what justice is. Everybody has a need for community. And so I think if at the core of what we're doing, and as we build these loving, love-filled communities, I think that you know, we just kind of meet people's real needs and help them know, like, you know, Jesus is the person behind all of this. They start to go. So that, you know, that guy, I think within a couple years he was more agnostic, and with a little bit of time he started to want to, hey, you guys, I know you guys are doing some good in the neighborhood. Is there anything I can join in with? And so he starts to join in on the mission that God was a part of. And he's not quite there yet, but like, you know, he's still simmering, if you will. But but everybody has. There's another guy from a Chinese guy who was just asking me, like, so what's, you know, trying to discover his purpose in life. And so I just kind of posed a question to him, like, well, what do you think your purpose is? And it's like, I don't know. It's like, okay, well, like, is there anybody around you that you've asked? Is like, nobody around me knows what their purpose is. It's like, you know, I like to ask questions and say, well, do you see any patterns in the world? Do you know, and just kind of ask, you know, do you ever feel a sense of justice in some of these beauty, and feel a need for community, and just start dialoguing at these points where I know everybody has a sense of, and where does that come from? Why do we have a desire even to have a purpose, you know? And all of that kind of eventually comes back to the Father, Son, and Spirit. And I think, you know, depending, as we pray and really depend on the Spirit to be our guide and to hear His voice, and to treat every person where they're at, meet them where they're at. Like Paul says, I became a Jew to Jew, a Greek to the Greek. He knew how to build bridges to kind of meet people where they're at, so that, like, Jesus, you know, we could introduce them to Jesus and they can come into this one, the humanity. So
thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that, JR. You know, this kind of fits into the theme of the Praxis Gathering this year, which is love your neighborhood. And so would you just take a moment and tell us about the Praxis Gathering, how it got started, and, you know, the theme of this year? Just to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we're totally excited about being in Philadelphia this year. Praxis Gathering is fairly young. This is going to be our third year. The first two were in DC. It really started to kind of develop for church planters that really want to plant with a missional and movemental kind of mindset. This year, our theme is to love your neighborhood, because one of our core values is being place-based, not space-based, but place-based. And it's kind of the difference is, like, you know, when we plant churches, we're asking the question, not, what builds our church up the biggest, but if God's reign were to be more fully realized in this neighborhood, what would be different? And the church then kind of starts to live into that mission. And so the whole neighborhood is the parish, and we're just kind of seeing what God's doing and joining him in that effort. So Doug is gonna be sharing with us. We have Michael Frost, who we had a webinar recently. He's going to be there. If you go to the practicegathering.com, you'll see just a whole wide range of people. We're going to have some neighborhood immersion times. So local planters and pastors in the Philadelphia area and different neighborhoods are going to kind of take us and help us explore their neighborhood and help us know what they're doing there. So that's we're totally excited about this coming one. And I believe. Go ahead, Doug. Oh, I just think, just so you know, like August 22nd is the last day for regular prices. So before they go up, you guys should try to get in there.
Thanks so much, JR. Appreciate you kind of bringing everybody up to speed with the practice gathering. So, Doug, this question is for you to start. How do you respond to the real life issue of gentrification?
Well, Lori, I'll say this. I haven't necessarily dealt with that in Camden.
Okay.
We don't necessarily have, I'm sure we got a tiny bit downtown, but gentrification is not a reality for me in Camden. We've had few beautification projects. We've done the tax abatement for a bunch of businesses downtown, and a lot hasn't spilled over into our residents. However, our mayor, Dana Red, has done a good job in tearing down some houses and stuff like that. But I can speak to gentrification because I have a bunch of sons in the ministry who are dealing with it. And I have a bunch of sons in the ministry who are dealing with it. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I have a bunch of sons in the ministry who are dealing with it. And in the process, they're trying to be a church that invests in the education of properties, finances, and understanding what gentrification is. Like gentrification, that's not like a word we run around the hood flinging. That's a sociological word. Less that. So gentrification for us is the white folk buying up the raggedy houses and putting in Starbucks. That's as deep as we are with it. So, I think our simple answer is to really have some real life conversations with the community, make them aware, because the gentrification issue for me is the driving out of people and the displacement of people that further displaces them into tougher situations at a deep loss of money. And then a whole people group is removed. And so, somebody says, well, Pastor, they sell their house for that little bit of money. That is what it is. That's still exploitation often. So the church has to step in, I believe, from town hall meetings to just a part of discipleship and education and investment in the community to teach them how to understand what that looks like when that happens. And also in the area where it's happened, really try to pull in those new areas that have been gentrified, because once they are, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, they got the spot. How can we impact them now with the gospel? And so that it moves from two people groups colliding in anger to two people groups now maybe getting married through the gospel and change it for the next community. JR is going to be much better at that. No,
I've seen, I would say what is really, more commonly bad gentrification, but there are a few cases of what I would say is good gentrification. And I think one of the big differences that Doug mentioned is if it's if it's kind of like a totally outside force coming in and ultimately pushing the current residents out, that's a bad sense of gentrification. One of the good examples is there's a Majora Carter, who was a South Bronx native, who kind of termed the idea of self-gentrification. And that's when the people who are in the neighborhood, I mean, everybody wants a better economics, everybody wants a better neighborhood, but the question is, like, are we pushing people out to make it better, or are we seeing the people who are in the neighborhood and in that place, making that place a better place, and finding other resources to pull into that, but they're the agents of change. And so what's cool, and I would encourage people to look up Majora Carter, Majora Carter, and she demonstrated, I think, what self-gentrification looks like when people live in the deteriorating neighborhood and seek to see it transform. So she basically founded a park in a spot that they were trying to kind of make a waste transfer facility. And she put a park there instead, in the South Bronx. She hired local gamers to test software and provide customer service for major tech outfits. And recently, she opened the first Bouquet coffee shop in Hunts Point, which is a very marginalized neighborhood. Again, but this is all done from the people who live in the neighborhood. And I think that's a type of good gentrification, when the primary agents are the people that actually live there. They're not being displaced and being pushed out, but they're being elevated into a different level of living. So,
yes, something that I think that's great, JR. And I think one, there's a lot of complexity to just the theme of gentrification, and I would just say that as a Christian, as a planter that's looking to live on mission in an urban neighborhood, to me, the worst thing as it relates to gentrification that could happen is to not be aware of whatever those local dynamics are. So I think that just finding out what happens when X or Y happens and what the outcome would be would help people have a customized and a contextualized response to that. So one question, that's definitely an issue with living on mission in an urban community, and this question is towards you, JR, is how do you minister with those who have little transportation or low income, and just the whole idea of any financial gaps? Oh, I think you're on mute. Okay, there you go.
Maybe I don't have anything to say now. No, I think the beauty of place-based ministry instead of commuter church is like the church is in the neighborhood. The transportation is if you got some feet you can walk. But even if you're not, like one of our planters, I love to tell the story, Jane Lamb, where she decided, like she lives in San Francisco. She's from Hong Kong, but she's lived in the U.S. for a long time. And she wanted to go to the roughest neighborhood in San Francisco. And there's not that many rough spaces left in San Francisco, but there is a Tenderloin district. That's the only place that was rough. She went there, and then what she discovered is that there were 5,000 Chinese-speaking senior citizens that none of the new church plants were looking at and talking to. These were definitely people who were not very mobile, not very much money. And she just planted the church right in their midst, so, and not only that, but she got them a little bit mobile. I mean, she's seeing like 91, 92-year-olds, come to Christ. She's taken them out on their walkers, and they're walking around and praying, doing a prayer walk around their block on their walkers. And then talk about mobile and movement, that's happening there. So I think it's kind of like goes into like, does a church exist for the sake of the neighborhood and the place? Because then transportation is not an issue. And, low income, I think for income is kind of like, I think we have to, learn to share each other's resources, but also realize that every single person made in the image of God has something beautiful to bring to the table. And they have a gift. I believe every person made in the image of God has, is a apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, or teacher. And when they give their life to Christ, they bring that to the kingdom and to the church. And we have to help people of each class and whether they have money or not, realize, you have something to contribute, to bring to the table here. And so even, Jane, maybe these people who think they're on their last leg, they have a fresh life breathed into them as they become Christians, and now they're going out and sharing with some of their other people that live in that space that can't move around too often. Some of them maybe that can't even get out of bed.
Thanks. And Doug, how would you share, how do we minister among those who have little transportation, low income, and,
And briefly, I aim in JR's statements, and I would say from my urban context, this is what I realize. Because I have people who will say, everybody calls me Diddy, because I was Pastor Doug, then I was PD, and then I went from PD to P Diddy, then I went to just Diddy, and I don't want to get sued, but so most people just call me Diddy. So I remember this. I remember we were doing everything we could to shuffle and grab and pick up. I grew up in the hood, so the church bus would show up. But much like JR, we're trying to do incarnational ministry, incarnation, local and present. We're trying to get this neighborhood. However, there are, and I don't want to breeze past, but there are people who would have transportation problems, older, hard to, wheelchair and stuff like that. Man, we're gonna figure that out. But as it pertains to, in general, here's what a grandma said when I was talking to her about, because she was wanting me to talk to her grandson about the Lord. And so she said, Pastor, now where your church at? And I told her, he says, Grandma, I ain't gonna have no way. And she said, boy, you get around fine to get that weed. You ain't never had a problem getting to the club. You're gonna find a way to get to church. And so I think that we underestimate the fact that folk can get around. Folk get around just fine. And and if there is a real case of that, we got a bunch of people with cars, period. And I live in Camden. The public transportation system ain't bad. If I've got to ask the executive pastor to get me some bus passes and to help these folk get started, we'll do that. We've done that for people to help them get jobs for their first 2 weeks before they're checked. We've done that. But generally, the gospel is a call to die. And it's not just a call to chill. And so when you hustling on the street, you ain't chilling, you scrambling, ducking the police. You meet Jesus, well, you scramble and you get in there and worship with us. You get around the city fine without a car. When you crazy, get around the city, get to church fine without a car. And when those are real cases that need transportation, level of sick and shut in, disabled, and some children, well, we got some mothers at the church that got cars. They're going to get you there slow, but they're going to get you there.
Oh, man, that's awesome. So our time is not quite gone, but we have a few great questions. And then also for those of you who are joining, want to make sure that you stay tuned in to the end, because we've got some specials that we're making available to everyone who's on this webinar. I want to ask the question that this question, and I'll start with you, Doug. How do you build synergy between different types of people? For instance, a lot of cities have a university downtown in that urban area, and then you have the local, could be urban poor. You've got different maybe professionals that are coming to the city. How do you build synergy between these different types of people?
Yes, it's very challenging. That's a missional code I am still working on to crack. I'll say what I've sought to do is meet people. I've tried to find a central thing that is happening. In Camden, that's a little bit more difficult because we are a primarily impoverished city, where you go to St. Louis, you have sections of good and then hood. You go to Chicago, sections and then good. Almost our whole city outside of downtown by the hospital is urban, urban hood, urban residential and rough. Therefore, I would try to find something central to the city like jazz or like something that we could do together. And so I've sought that heavy in the city of Camden, especially we have 3 schools, Rowan University, Rutgers University, Camden, and Camden County College. And then, 2 blocks out, we have what we call downtown, and downtown is rugged. And so trying to figure that out has been a challenge, and I know that's a heavy challenge in a lot of cities. However, what we've sought to do is blend groups together based on serving. So my college kids are great tutors. So if they can tutor into the hood, then next thing you know, they're hanging out and connecting with those kids, hollering at their parents. And next thing you know, there's a relationship that's built around, if that young lady is trying to be a teacher, well, I want her to help tutor. If she can play the guitar, well, then train one of these kids in the hood on the guitar. And now we have this synergistic flow where there's relationship, there's give, there's take, because them college kids are going to eat every bit of food they can get when they're over there helping with the guitar. Amen. And at the same time, the parents are going to be so excited about their child learning guitar. So when we can, that's what I've sought to do, is pair together, particularly my college kids, as best I can with anybody in the city, and then push out them into. So I'll go as far as to say, hey man, I think you should be hanging with, what's her name? Why don't you take them to lunch? And try to do my own little bootleg symbiosis to push them together. So yeah, and I'm still working on that. Pray for me. I'm praying and asking God to give me more wisdom in that. I'm not doing great.
Well, thanks for sharing the great practical steps that you are taking. That's awesome. JR, how would you say different groups kind of build synergy?
Yeah, I think for in Hollywood, there's some groups that are different, that are easier to synergize, and others that are more difficult. One of the things that is the bigger difficulty, I think, is when it comes to class barriers. And I think part of the reason is, like, I would say there's poor people that live in the south part of the neighborhood that tend to work 2 jobs, and it's just even a capacity of meeting. And so are we kind of willing to kind of adjust our schedules, to connect with those people, and I with different people that are different than us. I think the thing for me is pulling together the diversity into a discipleship group of 8 to 12, journeying together, building a mid-sized group together, and within that, hearing each other's stories and getting to know each other, living in community together around areas of mission, as Doug said. Like the thing that's best is not affinity oriented, but service oriented and mission oriented. I think that's what pulls diversity together. We learn to see and appreciate the gifts and the blessings that each person brings to the table, accenting, whether it's like different foods to enjoy, different cultures to learn, like it's a joy to see and live into diversity.
Thank you all so much. I think this has been a great conversation about how we as planters, as Christians, can live on mission in an urban neighborhood. So I really want to thank you for your time. Chris, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. With everybody on the call, would love to highlight that Doug Logan has written a book. It's called On the Block, Developing a Biblical Picture for Missional Engagement. And I would encourage any and everyone who's interested in digging, deeper into this subject to grab that book. JR has also written and co-written a couple of books, The Church's Movement, an InterVarsity Press book released last year, which focuses on starting and sustaining missional and incarnational communities, and then also creating a missional culture. We also have, for everyone who's participating on this webinar, we have 3 free ebooks that are available. If you have been listening to this conversation about planting and living on mission in an urban context, but you yourself actually may be in a rural context, we have an ebook for you or for anyone that you know. It's called Rural Churches on the Cutting Edge. We also have Missional Church Planting, Surviving and Thriving Your First Year. And then lastly, How to Become the Church That Your Neighborhood Needs. And so we want to make those available. If you stay tuned, you will receive a link to these ebooks in your inbox, the same email that you used to register for the webinar. We also are going to offer everyone on this webinar a discount, a $40 discount for the Praxis Gathering. Registration will be transitioning into late registration in a few weeks. So we would encourage you to check your calendar, September 21st to 23rd in Philadelphia. And if you use the Urban Webinar discount code, then you can reduce your expense by $40. It's going to be definitely worth the time to come. There'll be plenty of others. There's Doug and plenty of others like him that'll be focused on specific areas as it pertains to place-based church planting. And we'll have tracks for urban, suburban, and rural. And so I just want to thank you all for attending. I want to thank the Praxis Gathering, and thank the Hebrew Movement. Thank you, Doug Logan, and thank you, JR. And so if you're interested in more free webinars, you can definitely check out Missio Alliance. So we thank you all for attending today.
Take care.
Take care, man. Lord bless you. Hey, Bishop, great to be with you. Miss Lori, love you. Did a great job. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, man.
Lord bless you, God.
Peace.